The office was bustling with the usual sounds of ringing phones, typing keyboards, and murmured conversations. It was a busy morning at the high-end corporate firm, a place where only the brightest minds were welcomed. In the glass-walled conference room, Richard, the hiring manager, sat at the head of the table. He was well-dressed in a sharp suit, a man who prided himself on his ability to spot top-tier talent. His reputation as a no-nonsense, career-driven professional was well known, and he had little patience for anyone he considered unqualified. Richard's belief was simple: the best candidates came from top schools and had impressive resumes, preferably with business experience. Anything else was irrelevant. The door to the conference room opened, and Daniel walked in. He was a middle-aged man, his attire neat but unflashy. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his posture straight and steady, yet there was a calmness about him that made him seem different from the others Richard had interviewed. Richard immediately sized him up, noticing the military haircut and the subtle creases in his uniform-like shirt. Without even hearing his background, Richard already assumed that someone with a military past wouldn't fit in with the corporate world. Richard flipped through Daniel's resume with disinterest, barely pausing to read it. His eyes skimmed over the military accolades and the leadership positions Daniel had held. It was clear to him that Daniel's experience was rooted in a world far removed from the high-pressure corporate environment he thrived in. Richard sighed and leaned back in his chair, barely glancing up at Daniel. "So you've spent most of your career in the military?" Richard asked, his tone more dismissive than curious. Daniel nodded, his voice calm. "Yes, I served for 20 years in leadership roles, overseeing teams, handling crises, and managing large-scale operations. I've been trained in decision-making under pressure and leading people through difficult circumstances." Richard raised an eyebrow, barely hiding his skepticism. "I see, but to be honest, your background doesn't exactly scream business savvy. Military experience doesn't exactly translate to what we do here. We're looking for someone who has worked in the corporate world, someone who understands the complexities of the market and the demands of the clients." Daniel's face remained calm, though he could feel the sting of Richard's words. "I understand your concern," he replied. "However, the skills I developed, leadership, crisis management, strategic planning, are universal. They can be applied in any environment, including business." Richard leaned forward, his gaze cold. "Look, Daniel, I respect your service, but you just don't have the relevant qualifications. I don't think this is a good fit." He glanced at the clock, signaling the end of the interview. Daniel nodded respectfully, though a flicker of disappointment flashed in his eyes. "I understand, Richard. Thank you for your time." Without another word, Daniel stood, shook Richard's hand firmly, and left the room. He walked out of the office with quiet dignity, his steps steady, but the sadness in his eyes was undeniable. As Daniel left the room, Emily, Richard's assistant, stood nearby, her discomfort clear. She had witnessed the entire interaction from the hallway, and it left a bad taste in her mouth. Emily had always respected veterans. She believed their experience shaped them into strong, resilient leaders, no matter the industry. But Richard's cold dismissal of Daniel struck her as wrong, even unfair. She hesitated for a moment before walking up to Richard's desk. "Richard," she began carefully, "don't you think you were a little hard on him?" Richard looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Hard? I was direct. The man didn't have the right qualifications. He's a veteran, Emily, not a corporate professional. We need someone who knows how to navigate the business world, not someone who spent his career in the military." Emily frowned, but Richard, veterans are known for their leadership, discipline, and problem-solving skills. They handle high-pressure situations and make tough decisions. Those are things that could benefit this company. Richard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You're idealizing them. Sure, they've led troops, but leading a group of soldiers doesn't compare to leading a team of executives or managing multi-million-dollar deals. Veterans just don't belong in high-level corporate jobs." Emily bit her lip, holding back any further objections. She knew arguing with Richard would be pointless, but as she returned to her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Word quickly spread throughout the office about Daniel's rejection. Some employees exchanged glances, whispering quietly about how unfairly Richard had treated him. There was a sense of unease, as many of them believed Richard's judgment had been clouded by his own bias, not by any real evaluation of Daniel's potential. The murmurs grew louder as the day wore on. That evening, as Richard was preparing to leave the office, a company-wide email popped up in his inbox. It was from the CEO, announcing an important board meeting scheduled for the following morning. Richard briefly skimmed the email, noting that there would be a special guest in attendance, a new addition to the board of directors. He was still feeling a bit smug from the day's interview, confident that his decision to reject Daniel had been the right one. The email made no mention of who the special guest was, but Richard didn't give it much thought. He was used to these announcements. It wasn't unusual for a high-profile business figure to join the board from time to time. He assumed it was just another guest speaker or advisor, nothing to worry about. As he packed up his things, he barely gave the upcoming meeting a second glance. Richard's mind was already made up, and he was eager to unwind after the long day. He had no intention of letting the interview with Daniel bother him. After all, he'd done what was best for the company, hadn't he? On the way home, Richard's thoughts wandered to more pressing matters. He was preparing for an upcoming deal, reviewing financial reports, and planning his next big career move. The rejection of Daniel seemed insignificant now, nothing more than a footnote in his busy, fast-paced life. However, as the evening stretched on and Richard relaxed at home, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something about the day wasn't quite right. Maybe it was Emily's discomfort or the way some of the other employees had spoken in hushed tones. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside. After all, tomorrow would bring a new day, and Richard had more important things to focus on. Little did he know, the next day would turn his world upside down. The next morning, the entire company gathered in the large, sleek conference room. The room buzzed with excitement as employees shuffled into their seats, exchanging whispers about the special guest the CEO had teased the night before. Some speculated it was a new investor or a top executive from another company. But no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Richard entered the room, still unfazed, and took his usual seat near the front. He scanned the crowd, half listening to the light chatter as the meeting began. The CEO, a polished man with a commanding presence, stood at the podium, ready to make his announcement. Richard didn't pay much attention to the details. His mind already focused on the upcoming presentations. Then, the CEO's voice cut through the room. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "We have an exciting announcement today. We're honored to welcome a new member to our board of directors, someone whose leadership and experience will be invaluable to our company's future." Richard's attention momentarily drifted toward the stage, as the CEO smiled and motioned for the new board member to join him. The doors to the room opened, and Richard's heart stopped. There, walking toward the front with the same calm, confident stride Richard had seen yesterday in his office, was Daniel. The same man who Richard had so coldly dismissed as unqualified was now stepping into the spotlight, his posture perfect, his demeanor commanding. Richard's face went pale as his eyes widened. His mind raced as he tried to process the shock. "No way, it can't be him," the CEO continued, completely unaware of the silent chaos unfolding in Richard's mind. "This is Daniel, our new board member. Many of you may not know his story, but I assure you, it's one of exceptional leadership and success." Daniel served in the military for over 20 years, rising to the rank of colonel. His career is marked by his ability to lead under pressure, making critical decisions in life-or-death situations. But that's not all. The CEO paused for emphasis, and Richard's stomach sank. After retiring from the military, Daniel became a successful entrepreneur. He's invested in several businesses, helping them grow from the ground up through strategic planning, innovation, and strong leadership. His ability to transform struggling companies into thriving ones has earned him recognition across multiple industries. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man he had dismissed so easily, the one he thought didn't belong in a corporate setting, was now one of the most influential people in the room. Daniel wasn't just a veteran, he was a decorated officer, an entrepreneur, and a force to be reckoned with. Richard's mind reeled, his earlier judgments crumbling in an instant. As Daniel took his place at the front of the room, Richard remained frozen in his seat, a wave of realization crashing over him. His heart pounded, his face flushing with a deep sense of shame. He had just witnessed someone he had written off as unqualified stand before him, commanding the respect of everyone in the room. Daniel wasn't just another businessman or a veteran, he was a powerhouse of experience and achievement. Richard's stomach twisted as the magnitude of his mistake settled in. Daniel stood tall, his expression calm, but there was an unmistakable fire in his eyes. He smiled warmly at the crowd and began speaking, his voice steady and confident. "I'm honored to be joining this incredible team," Daniel started. "But before we dive into the work ahead, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. Leadership isn't about titles, and it's certainly not about your resume. Leadership is about recognizing potential in people, about seeing what they can bring to the table, even if it's not immediately obvious. It's about respecting others for who they are, not just for what they've done in the past." Richard's grip on his pen tightened, his face burning with guilt. Daniel's words cut through him like a knife, and though Daniel hadn't mentioned him by name, Richard could feel the weight of the unspoken reference. The memories of their interview flashed in his mind, the way he'd dismissed Daniel's experiences, the way he had been so quick to judge based on a narrow, superficial perspective. "I made a mistake," Richard thought, but it was already too late. Daniel continued, his words measured but powerful. "Too often people judge too quickly. They assume they know what someone can or can't do based on what's on paper, or based on their past. But the truth is, the most valuable skills aren't always the ones that show up in a job description. Some of the best leaders and innovators come from places we don't expect, and it's our job to see beyond that." Richard couldn't bring himself to meet Daniel's eyes. He stared down at his notepad, feeling the shame seep into every corner of his being. The confident, arrogant man who had walked into the interview room the day before now felt small, insignificant. He had failed to recognize Daniel's worth, and now he had to live with the regret of his hasty decision. As Daniel spoke, Richard's mind raced, and he wished more than anything that he could turn back time. The meeting ended, but Richard couldn't focus on anything but Daniel. He remained seated as the room emptied, his mind racing. He had to apologize, had to make things right. He couldn't just let the day pass without acknowledging the colossal mistake he had made. His heart pounded as he finally stood and walked toward Daniel, who was talking to a few colleagues near the door. Richard approached hesitantly, his usual confidence replaced by a deep sense of discomfort. "Daniel, hey, I need to apologize." Richard stammered, his words tumbling out in a rushed mess. "I was wrong. I should never have dismissed you the way I did yesterday. You're clearly more than qualified. I didn't see that at first. I'm sorry." Daniel turned slowly to face him, his expression calm but unreadable. He didn't respond right away, and the silence between them felt heavier with each passing second. Richard waited, unsure of what to expect. He thought maybe Daniel would offer a polite, quick forgiveness. Instead, Daniel just looked at him, his eyes steady and unwavering. His silence seemed to speak volumes. No words were needed for Richard to fully understand the weight of his mistake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel spoke, his voice low but firm. "Next time, don't judge a book by its cover," he said quietly, offering a small knowing smile. And with that, Daniel turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing there, rooted to the spot. The brief exchange stung more than any harsh words could have. Richard's chest tightened as the realization sank in. He had been arrogant, blind to the true value of people, and now, he would have to live with the consequences. As Daniel disappeared down the hallway, Richard couldn't shake the quiet, humbling truth of his advice. It echoed in his mind, a reminder that appearances were deceiving, and that the best lessons often came from the most unexpected places. The days that followed were quiet for Richard, but they were also transformative. He couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. "Next time, don't judge a book by its cover." They echoed in his mind as he reflected on his actions. Richard had always prided himself on being a decisive leader, someone who could cut through the noise and make quick decisions. But now, he realized, he had been blinded by his own arrogance. He had judged Daniel solely by his past, his resume, and the assumptions he'd made about him, failing to recognize the true value of his experiences. Slowly but surely, Richard began to change. He revisited his hiring approach, realizing that qualifications on paper weren't always the full story. He started to focus on people's potential, on their ability to adapt, to lead, and to think creatively. He learned to look beyond the surface and see the skills, passion, and drive that truly made someone a valuable asset. Over time, Richard became known not just for his business acumen, but for his newfound humility and respect for others. He was no longer the man who dismissed people because they didn't fit his narrow definition of success. The story of Daniel's rejection and the lesson he taught Richard spread throughout the office, leaving a lasting impression on everyone. It reminded them all that sometimes, the most valuable people don't come in the packages we expect, and that real greatness often lies beneath the surface. Thank you for watching today's story. Richard's journey reminds us all that true leadership isn't about titles or resumes, it's about recognizing the value in others, regardless of their background. Sometimes, the most unexpected people have the greatest potential. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and leave a comment to let us know what you think. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an amazing story like this one. Remember, the next time you meet someone new, take a moment to see beyond the surface. You never know the greatness they might bring to the table. Thanks again for watching.